Some killers become infamous, names we can't forget, faces plastered across documentaries, timelines we can map down to the minute. But the ones that truly haunt you are the opposite, the offenders who leave a trail of terror and then dissolve into the background like they were never real. They don't just leave victims behind, they leave unfinished questions. And the worst question of all, what if they never stopped? What if they simply learned how to disappear? Today, we're diving into 3 chilling cases involving serial offenders who, in one way or another, slipped through history's fingers. 1. The Connecticut River Valley. Murders, a quiet region, a violent pattern. The Connecticut River winds through rural towns, farmland, and thick woods near the New Hampshire-Vermont border. For decades, this area carried the kind of small community safety where violent crime felt distant, something that happened somewhere else. But as the late 1970s turned into the 1980s, that sense of distance collapsed. The first known shock. On October 24, 1978, 27-year-old Catherine Milliken headed out after work to photograph birds. She parked near the entrance of the Chandler Brook Wetland Reserve in New London, New Hampshire, and never returned. Her body was discovered the following day not far from where she was last seen. It would later be recognized as the beginning of something larger, what would become known as the Connecticut River Valley Murders. A disappearance along the highway. Nearly 3 years later, another woman vanished. On July 25, 1981, 37-year-old Mary Elizabeth Critsley disappeared near Interstate 91 around the Massachusetts-Vermont border. She was studying at the University of Vermont and had been dropped off near a turnpike exit to hitchhike. Weeks later, her body was found deep in a wooded area, far from where she was last seen, too decomposed to clearly determine the cause of death. Then, for a while, the violence went quiet. The killings return. In 1984, the pattern resumed. On May 30th, Bernice Courtemanche, a nurse's aide, vanished while hitchhiking from Claremont to Newport, New Hampshire, to visit her boyfriend. When she didn't arrive, she was reported missing. Her remains were discovered 2 years later near the Sugar River, with evidence suggesting a violent attack. Only weeks after Bernice disappeared, another woman vanished under eerie circumstances. Ellen Ruth Freed, 26, worked as a supervising nurse at Valley Regional Hospital. On July 22, 1984, she stopped at a payphone around 2 a.m. to call her sister. The two spoke for about an hour. During that conversation, Ellen mentioned something unsettling, a strange car circling the lot repeatedly. She briefly stepped away to check her own vehicle, returned to the call, and that was the last time anyone heard from her. Her car was later found abandoned just a few miles away. Her remains were located in August, with signs of violence and possible sexual assault. The daylight escalation. By 1986, whoever was doing this seemed to be operating with even more confidence. On April 15, 1986, Linda Moore, 36, was home doing yard work while her husband was away. When he returned that evening, he found her dead. Investigators noted signs of a struggle, but no robbery and no forced entry. Witnesses remembered a suspicious man lingering nearby that afternoon, 20 to 25 years old, clean-shaven, round-faced, stocky, dark-rimmed glasses, and carrying a blue knapsack. Just 10 days later, on April 25th, loggers in Unity, New Hampshire, discovered the remains of Eva Marie Morse, 27, a single mother who had gone missing the year before after being last seen hitchhiking near Charleston, New Hampshire. Her remains showed signs consistent with the ongoing pattern of violence. Then came another disappearance in Vermont. On January 10, 1987, nurse Barbara Agnew, 38, vanished while driving home on a snowy night. Her green BMW was found at a rest stop in Hartford with a damaged door and blood inside. A nearby dumpster contained blood-stained personal items. 2 months later, her body was discovered in a wooded area. At this point, investigators were staring at something hard to ignore: a repeated victim profile, repeated circumstances, repeated brutality, and a repeated geography. The survivor who changed the case. And then, finally, someone lived. On the night of August 6, 1988, 22-year-old Jane Borowski, 7 months pregnant, stopped at a closed convenience store in West Swansea, New Hampshire, to use a vending machine. She noticed an unfamiliar Jeep Wagoneer parked close beside her. Uneasy, she got back into her car. A man stepped out of the Jeep, came around, and approached her window, asking about the payphone, then suddenly turned violent, accusing her of attacking his girlfriend. Jane insisted she didn't know what he was talking about. The attack escalated rapidly, and she was stabbed repeatedly. But against all odds, she survived, driving herself for help and making it to a friend's house. She endured catastrophic injuries, yet lived to provide investigators with something they had never truly had before: a direct account of the attacker, a vehicle description, and partial license plate information. Her baby survived as well, later facing lasting medical challenges. And here's what's terrifying. After Jane's attack, the known series effectively stopped. No more confirmed murders tied to the same pattern followed. Why it went unsolved? The cases spanned multiple states, New Hampshire, Vermont, and near Massachusetts, creating coordination problems, especially in smaller rural jurisdictions with fewer resources. Early on, investigators didn't even realize the cases were connected. In the era before modern databases and widespread DNA tools, that delay mattered. Even today, the case remains officially unresolved. Investigators have continued to revisit leads. There was even a renewed search effort as recently as 2024 involving a warrant served at a home in Newport, New Hampshire. But no arrest emerged from it. The suspects and the dead ends. Over the years, names rose and fell. One prominent suspect was Michael Nicolo, an Army helicopter pilot and Vietnam veteran whose later life ended in a tragic murder-suicide in 2005. A private investigator looking into a separate disappearance linked to Nicolo began connecting dots. One missing woman was a nurse. Several victims were nurses. He had access to the region, and he reportedly owned a Jeep Wagoneer in the 1980s, matching Borowski's description. Borowski reportedly said he resembled her attacker at first, but later believed he wasn't the man. Other leads surfaced: a confession that was later recanted, another confession that was allegedly ignored or couldn't be corroborated, each one offering a flicker of hope, then collapsing into uncertainty. The profile that still fits. Across the confirmed cases, investigators noted repeated themes: women alone, often isolated or near vehicles. Frequent hitchhiking connections, repeated use of a knife, heavy focus on the chest and neck, evidence of struggle. Bodies often left in remote wooded locations. One criminal psychologist suggested the killer may have been opportunistic rather than a long-term stalker, moving between familiar hunting spots, waiting for the right moment. Jane's case supported that idea. Her plans that night were last minute, which suggests the attacker may have been searching for an opportunity rather than targeting her specifically. And yet, without a conclusive forensic link, the killer remains a ghost. 2. Istanbul's severed leg. Mystery, fear in a city of millions. Istanbul is a city built on layers, ancient and modern, crowded and intimate, familiar and unpredictable. And in early 2000, it became the stage for a grim mystery that captured national attention. It began on January 8, 2000, in the Spice Bazaar. A man sorting through trash noticed blood on papers. When he looked closer, he found a severed human leg. Forensics suggested it belonged to a woman in her mid-20s, removed days earlier, and notably well-groomed, shaven, clean, cared for. Months later, on May 19th, a ship captain heard something bumping against his boat at the dock. He found another severed leg in the water, and soon after, another was found on shore. These appeared to belong to a woman in her 20s to 30s with dark red nail polish. Then another leg turned up on December 7th, discovered by high school students, again appearing to belong to a young woman, again groomed. In 2001, the discoveries continued. On March 12th, 2 garbage bags were found in the Hadar district, each containing a leg, this time from 2 different people, a young woman and a man. Investigators noted the woman's leg had cleaner cuts, while the man's appeared more roughly severed. Toxicology suggested alcohol and drugs in the male victim's system, hinting he might have been incapacitated. The only identified victim. A breakthrough arrived on March 22nd when garbage collectors found a leg near a subway line. It belonged to 17-year-old Yasemin Duran, who had gone missing 2 days earlier after being seen at a post office. Her belongings were later found in a park. Then, chillingly, a call came into her school. A voice described as unstable warned, "Don't look for that girl, you won't find her." Another similar call followed minutes later. The final known discovery came July 20th. Another leg, this time from an adult man, with high alcohol levels similar to earlier male remains. After that, the case went silent. Investigators believed there were 7 victims total, though only Yasemina was ever positively identified. Why identification was nearly impossible. The killer's signature made traditional identification difficult, leaving only legs stripped investigators of many normal avenues. CCTV was limited at the time, witnesses didn't emerge, and DNA tools were far less useful without databases to match against. Authorities even sought help from abroad, including profiler Richard Walter, who produced a psychological profile suggesting the offender was likely a male in his mid-20s, methodical, and possibly an outsider to Istanbul, someone who could move through crowds, dispose of evidence in public spaces, and blend back into ordinary life. The killer appeared to operate on a strange schedule, weeks or months between incidents, often in early hours, placing body parts where discovery would be quick and public panic guaranteed. The cold ending. The case ultimately stalled, and in a devastating legal twist, the statute of limitations for these murders reportedly expired in 2021, meaning even if the killer were identified later, prosecution for those specific crimes could be blocked under Turkish law. The files were archived, leads dried up, and the city was left with a horror story that ends not with justice, but with a locked cabinet. 3. Austin's Servant Girl Annihilator, an early American serial mystery. Austin in the 1880s was transforming, growing beyond frontier roots into a modern city. But in 1884, the city entered a nightmare that would become one of America's earliest serial murder legends. The spree began on December 30th, 1884. Molly Smith, a 25-year-old black domestic servant, was attacked in her employer's home late at night with an axe. Her partner, Walter Spencer, was also attacked and survived, initially drawing suspicion, but his injuries and lack of clear motive shifted attention elsewhere. In March 1885, 2 young Swedish immigrant servants, Clara Strand and Christine Martinsson, were attacked in servant quarters and left with life-altering injuries. They survived, but couldn't identify the attacker. On May 7th, Eliza Shelley, a mother of 3 and cook for a prominent family, was killed in her bed. Later in May, Irene Cross, another black domestic servant, was attacked with a large blade and died after briefly surviving. By late summer, the violence escalated further, an attack involving a mother and her young daughter. A brutal double murder of a couple sleeping behind an employer's home. Multiple survivors badly beaten in the same incidents. Then came the turning point, Christmas Eve. Two white women of higher social standing, Susan Hancock and Eula Phillips, were killed within hours of each other. Their husbands survived, injured and unconscious, leading to suspicion and later acquittals or overturned convictions. After that night, the killings stopped. Panic, racism, and a scattered investigation. Austin's response became frantic. Hundreds of men were arrested. Racial assumptions shaped the investigation, with black men disproportionately targeted, interrogated, and abused. Vigilante groups began roaming at night. Rumors spread that the killer had supernatural powers because dogs reportedly didn't bark near the crimes. Eyewitness testimony didn't help. Descriptions contradicted each other. Some claimed the killer was white, others described a darker complexion, some said he wore unusual clothing. Some believed multiple offenders were involved. And in an era before modern forensic science, that confusion was a disaster. A modern suspect emerges. Decades later, historians and researchers proposed a strong suspect, Nathan Elgin, a 19-year-old black cook living in Austin at the time, whose missing toe reportedly matched a bloody footprint found at a crime scene. A month after the final murders, Elgin was involved in a violent incident, was shot, and died the next day. The timing, paired with the sudden end of the murders, fueled suspicion, though no definitive proof exists. Without DNA, without a confession, and with the case buried in the chaos of the era, certainty remains out of reach. And still, the killer's name, real or unknown, has remained tied to Austin's history forever. These cases share one brutal theme: terror without resolution. Some ended because the killer died. Some ended because the killer moved. Some ended because the system wasn't ready. And some ended because time itself shut the door. But what makes them unforgettable isn't just the violence, it's the emptiness afterward. The quiet that follows when the trail goes cold, and the fear becomes the only thing still alive.